We have a talk by Linda Hill, who's a professor at Harvard Business School, and her research focuses on the leadership behaviors associated with innovation, change management, and strong cultures. She'll be talking about creating a genius culture, which is the topic of her new book. If you haven't done so already, be sure to grab a copy of the book outside in Charter's library. Please welcome to the stage Linda Hill.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here with all of you. I must say, I love that fireside chat panel thing, but I'm going to give you a quick lecture about some of the highlights of my research. I actually am really pleased to be with you, and I love what you all are trying to talk about. And in fact, when I began to study innovation, it was in part as a part of some other work I'm doing, because I'm the chair of the Leadership Initiative at Harvard Business School, and one of the things we were seeing is that people weren't necessarily wanting to come work at some of the companies that we all run. So what I'd like to talk with you about are really what we've learned in our most recent book, but I want to start by going back a little bit in history. It turns out that there's very little research that looks at the connection between leadership and innovation, and that's still true, but it was really true 20-some years ago. And I'm an organizational anthropologist, so my collaborators and I have spent hundreds of hours at this point studying leaders all around the world at different levels in the organization, mostly in business, but also in government and not-for-profits, to try to figure out what do exceptional leaders of innovation do, people who build teams, organizations, or now ecosystems able to innovate time and again. And it turns out that these leaders who build these kinds of organizations also are building organizations where employees have an experience that they really feel good about. The employees feel valued, they feel valuable, they feel like their work is meaningful. So I think there really is a connection between giving people the opportunity to, as we've heard earlier from some of the panelists, share their ideas or see those ideas become a reality. So when we began to do this work, one of the first organizations that I ended up studying, and it was somewhat accidental, so say hello to people who are sitting next to you. A person sitting next to me, we both had been stood up by the same CEO, and he happened to be fundamentally the chief technology officer of Pixar. And he said to me, well, would you like to go over to Pixar and see what's happening? Well, that's a trick question, and I said, of course I would. And that was in the late 90s, and I continued to study them for many, many years. In 2006, they were acquired by Disney, as some of you may recall, and my colleagues in strategy wrote a case about the fact that Disney had overpaid for Pixar. And indeed, I didn't think they'd overpaid, and I tried to say, well, maybe not. I don't think this is just luck, even though that's what you think it's about. I think it's something about the way they do their work and the way the leadership thinks. And so these are the movies they made when I was studying them very actively, because I tend to try to stick around and see how culture evolves over time, because it takes time for it to evolve. So what I really think it was about was the leadership. And many of you may have read Ed's book, and I highly recommend it, on Creativity, Inc., about how he thinks about leadership, and he actually was the co-founder. Everyone would tell you he's the secret sauce of Pixar, and I think people often think it's Steve Jobs, and certainly he is a very important piece of the puzzle. Ed would tell you that. But Ed is someone you really need to follow. So when I met Ed, one of the things that Ed described to me is, you know what, it's not just about talent. I think we do have exceptional talent. That's a gross understatement. But in fact, I think a lot of companies have exceptional talent. I think it's something about the way our talent works, because we all know talented teams that don't produce anything. So it's about the way we think about what we're up to. And they drew a picture, and I've made it fancier here for me, about how they worked. And they really, really believed that filmmaking was not about free agency. It was about teamwork. It was about building a community of people who really trusted each other, really knew each other. And in fact, as he described to me, why you see all these arrows, is, you know what, Linda, we never know where the problem is going to come up, but we're going to have to iterate and experiment to figure out what we're going to do to solve. Maybe it's an artistic problem, maybe it's actually a technical problem, and also there's another piece of this, maybe it's a business problem, it's a financial kind of problem. But what he said to me is that everybody at Pixar has a slice of genius. Everybody has a slice of genius. Everybody has passions, everybody has talents. And when you go to Pixar University, what you learn is your job as a leader is to figure out how you unleash people's slices of genius, all those diverse slices of genius, and figure out how to leverage them and get something done that the company wants to do. And needless to say, if you have people who are thinking about everybody having a slice of genius, all slices are not equal. Let's be clear about that. But if you don't think someone has a slice of genius, please let them go work somewhere else, because you're not going to want them to be in your community, and you're not going to treat them with the dignity that all people deserve. And indeed, what we know about innovation, and you all know this, is that it's not about some individual having an aha moment, some genius when you see innovation. It's usually the result of people who have different perspectives, different expertise, coming together to collaborate, experiment, and learn their way to the future. You cannot plan your way to an innovation. You can only act your way to an innovation. And it's going to be, by definition, emotionally and intellectually hard as a consequence. And the more breakthrough, the harder it's going to be. So what do you do as a leader to create this kind of capability of your organization to collaborate, experiment, and learn together? And as many of you may know, it's not easy, because so many of our organizations are quite siloed, and it's not easy to get organizations to be able to experiment. One of the organizations we had the privilege of studying was Procter Gamble. And at Procter Gamble, the idea that you would experiment with a customer and let the customer see something that was half-baked took a long time for them to get used to. So we began to look at lots more companies for our second book, Genius at Scale, and we oversampled, actually, on what I will describe as environments that maybe were somewhat more hostile to innovation. For our first book, we actually did spend a lot of time in tech companies and what I guess we'd maybe call even digital-first companies. For this book, because so many people said, oh, you know, I'm not Pixar, I'm not Google, I'm not this. We had Volkswagen and others in that book. We really oversampled on established businesses, many over 100 years old, that actually were in regulated industries, sort of hostile environments for innovation. And what we also did, we certainly have entrepreneurial ventures as well, but what we also did is very much looked at the use of emerging technologies and helping with getting people to adopt those to innovate. So there are a couple of themes in the book. But the first one, we found what we found in the first research, that you have to architect these environments. So leading innovation is not about saying, I have a vision, you know, follow me to the future. That is what leading change is about. And John Cotter was my mentor who hired me at Harvard Business School, and I believe that deeply. And the second thing, though, is that leading innovation, there's change in it, but it's different because it is about creating an environment, the culture and capabilities that will make people willing and able to co-create the future with you. And the mindset of co-creation is different than the mindset of followership. And that is not an easy thing you want to do is in this co-creation mindset, you want to architect the space for that to happen. The second role we see very important these days partly because of technology and how fast the world is moving, is you need these bridgers. Companies are discovering they just don't have the talent and capabilities inside the walls of the organization to get done what they have to do. So they're partnering more. So you need leaders who know how to be bridgers and partner across organizational boundaries. Microsoft, OpenAI. You know, big company, we don't have it, we need it fast, let's partner. Well, it doesn't matter if you get everything right at the top with all the governance and IP, if you don't have bridgers who can work across those two different environments and create innovative co-pilot solutions, right? That's a different role. We're hearing that bridging is what's actually stopping a lot of companies from developing AI solutions, particularly ones that can be adopted. Don't have people who know how to bridge across tech and business. So this is the role we're hearing the most about. The last one is about the catalyst. And the catalyst is actually a leader who knows how to not only build those partnerships, but really strategic partnerships. Strategic, I'd call them almost coalitions of stakeholders to get things done. I saw there was one of the organizations we studied, or one of the leaders, and I want to tell you we studied leaders at all levels to include individual contributors, but one of the leaders was from Pfizer who ran the trials, the global supply chain leader. And what he had to do, and that they had to do at Pfizer, is not only did they have to work within Pfizer in new ways to do those trials that quickly, but they had to partner with the German biotech company. They had to work with regulators all around the world. They had to work with health centers all around the world, and that's about catalyzing, really creating a whole ecosystem of players to get things done. So these three roles are the roles we saw, and I'm going to tell you quickly a story about Ajay Banga, and I'm going to use Ajay to illustrate these different roles in the time that we have left. So the first thing I want to say is Ajay is now the head of the World Bank, but when we studied him, he was the CEO of Mastercard, as I said. And if you had, as a CEO, this is what happened to the market value of this company. So this is really good, right? And I want you to notice, though, when it was that the market began to recognize that something different was happening. It's not the first year. Depends how you want to look at it. But what we see here, actually, is the move from them being a credit card company to being a tech company in the payment space. From moving from only having banks as clients or financial institutions as clients to actually having all kinds of clients. And as many of you may know, the rails of Apple Pay and Android Pay are Mastercard rails. So this is a big shift. And it required, when Ajay came in, he asked, is innovation going to be important to what we do? And it was 26 out of 27. People didn't think it mattered. The first thing he did is he talked about what's our purpose. And he said our purpose is financial inclusion. And that's about bringing in individuals and small businesses that we have not actually allowed to participate in the financial system. And the only way we can do that is if we have mobile solutions. So we have to develop a digital infrastructure and tools to do this. And that was the purpose. He laid out a strategy. I'm not going to go through the whole strategy with you, but the one thing he did about the strategy is he made sure that everybody understood the priorities. 50% of your resources are going to go to grow the core, but 50% need to go to those other two categories. And if you did a budget that didn't reflect that, then guess what? You need to go back and fix it. And then the other thing he did at the same time, working with HR and talent, is he began to think about, and they began to think, and he would say it they, not he, they began to think about the culture shift they needed to make. And needless to say, at the heart of this, you see the customer. They had to develop customer intimacy with all these different kinds of customers. But the approach was called DQ. Now, I was just in Italy talking about DQ, and it meant nothing to them. What does DQ mean to you all? Dairy Queen. So here you have, he wants you to think about Dairy Queen. That's exactly where he wants you to go, because you were happy when you were at Dairy Queen. But what it stands for is the decency quotient. We just are going to treat people decently. Now, who wants to tell the CEO, I don't want to be decent? He didn't. He said, look, we don't have time to do this breaking down of silos and everything. If someone sends you an email, the decent thing is to email them back. So he did the strategy stuff, but what's decent behavior? And indeed, he said, if they don't answer you within a week, assume they said yes to whatever you asked. So guess what? You didn't need to move any. Guess emails got answered. So he had all of these examples that he would just sort of say, this is decent behavior. Now, after all of this, they were measuring this along the way, and I do want you to see the kind of measurement. I don't have time to walk through it, but they don't really start focusing on financial outcomes for a while, because they really just need people to get going at it, just try their hand at this and thinking differently. And as a consequence, what ended up happening was they were able to make those moves and do what I described to you. I want to quickly describe to you the bridger role. And I'm going to skip to this one, because as many of we know, because we've been doing these surveys of executives now, about 10,000 around the world, and roundtables, many of you are building these innovation labs or these centers of excellence. What's really special about this center of excellence is really, I'd say, number 1 and 8. Number 1 is good ideas can come from anywhere. We've already heard that earlier here. They're going to come from inside the company. They're going to come from outside the company. The most important one is number 8. Labs is simply a stepping stone. Often what we do in our companies is we tell some people, you're the innovators, and the rest of you are, the worker bees or whatever, the executors. That does not work. You tend not to be able to scale when you do that, because when the innovators come up with something and pass it over to the executors, if you will, they reject it, because they're supposed to be working on the shoulds and the today, not the tomorrow. So in fact, here it was, we're simply an enabler of all of us in the organization, or at Delta when we looked at it. We're an enabler of all of us in the organization, the 80,000 employees, to come up with ideas and scale them, turn them into reality, launch them, commercialize them, because that's when it really makes a difference. So when you do this, and I'm going to just go through this quickly, this is their picture of what they identified. So what you see in the circle are the capabilities that Mastercard did not have. They did not have the time to develop them. They had to find partners outside to get access to all that you see outside. So they needed tons of bridgers who could help them bring all these different these capabilities into the organization, and worked on that very much. And indeed, when they looked at their ecosystem over time, it wasn't just startups. they actually had to build a whole lot of local ecosystems, and they needed people, again, who could be catalysts, who knew how to build the coalitions necessary to do this in different countries around the world. And the people who were able to deliver this and bring, eventually, I think it was like almost 1 billion people into the financial system, felt really good about their work. And they found that they were able to attract top talent against even top technical talent because they could show that they were making a difference. So I just want to end, because I only have 45 seconds left here, and I don't want to use my time up. I'm going to end by simply showing you one example of a family business, and this is Massimo and Lara. And I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of eating in his restaurant. His restaurant was #1, named, you can only be named twice for #1, and it was. It's a Michelin 3-star restaurant. But what they did, it's in Modena, and they were proponents of the slow food movement, you know, that we need to do our consumption and our production in ways that are more local and sustainable. And they wanted to do that, but you may or may not know, anybody who's a driver here, that in Modena is also, you find Ferrari and Lamborghini and so on. So their movement is called slow food, fast cars. Because he messed with his grandmother's recipes, which you're not really supposed to do in Italy. But one of the things they discovered, and this is very much, this is the family, these are the workers in the one restaurant right in Modena, but they began to see that they could use this restaurant as a platform for doing other things. And what it's actually turned into, because he doesn't see himself as a solo star, he thinks very much like they do at Pixar, I'm the chief mentor. I'm going to build a new generation of chefs who I'm going to send out into the world to not only create high-end restaurants, many of which have won Michelin stars, but also community kitchens decorated by Gucci. These community kitchens, there's one in Harlem here that's fabulous, where people deserve to have good meals and sustainable meals. So they've moved from Modena to actually, what you see in the blue are their restaurants that are high-end, and what you see in the orange are these community kitchens that they've built and other kinds of social enterprises. And they use their own kitchen in Modena to develop these chefs and send them out into the world and help them understand how do you bring together different parties in those different communities to solve the problems there. Just like we figured out when we had an earthquake, what were we going to do with the 400,000 wheels of Parmigiana that were destroyed. He came up with a recipe that created global demand that all of that Parmigiana all got sold and helped save that industry. So again, the meaning of the work, they use values to create values to scale, and when you do that, you build spaces that people really do exceptional work, innovate, and are happy to, you know, there's always all kinds of conflict that's allowed in these organizations, but you create these kinds of spaces. So I want to end by saying to you, if you go to Massimo's, work with him, he'll say to you first, who are you? And you say, I'm Linda. He says, no, who are you really? And he keeps probing and asking you questions about that, and then he turns you over into the kitchen and says, make something. And as you can see, it's together that we get things done. And who wouldn't want to work in a place like this? I was just with him, so I'm about 5 pounds fatter. And so the last thing I just want to say is, do you have the leadership you need to actually get done, makes you competitive and attract the talent you want? And stop thinking about some people as being your game changers and some people as being, quote, your value creators. Instead, think about everybody being in box one. And that's when you actually create the space for people to say, you know, I have some ideas, or I can help actually execute those ideas and turn them into reality. Thank you for your time and attention.